channel.
Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. It's been a tumultuous week across the country. Amid golden moments at the Olympic, there's been mass unrest at home. Has the government managed to avoid a major crisis with the riots? I'm going to be speaking to former Tory MP Sir John Redwood about the state of the British economy and whether the Labour Party is on the right track to encourage more investment. Mel Stride, the underdog in the Tory leadership race, will be here in the studio to outline why he believes he is the right person to take on the big job in opposition. Former Met Chief Detective Superintendent Kevin Hurley will be here with his perspective on this week's disorder. And former prison governors Steve Freer and Val Wawoski are co-founders of Tempus Novo, and they'll be here to weigh in with their first-hand experience of how prison should really work. We've once again got 90 minutes of punchy politics lined up for you this morning, so do not think of going anywhere. Well, to go through the papers this morning, I'm delighted to be joined now by political correspondent at The Spectator, James Heal. James, lovely to see you on this sunny Sunday. So let's discuss the aftermath of the riots. Sunday Times has published a piece by Rod Liddle, who's from Middlesbrough. I just found this a compelling read because he's trying to look at the reasons why this happened. And he puts a lot of it down to football hooliganism, and I think there are some thuggish groups that have been coordinated some of this action. He talks about the issue of two-tier policing, but he also says that a lot of people in his town where he grew up feel ignored, they feel left behind, and they feel resentful. I mean, it's an explanation. It's not a justification for violence, but it's an explanation, James.
Yeah, I mean, after a week of unrest and now with order restored, thankfully, it's almost now the sort of trickier task of kind of working out what are the reasons for this unrest, these riots, these disturbances? And those are much more thorny and difficult questions. Interestingly, of course, you say Rod Liddle has been sent by the Sunday Times to Middlesbrough. Elsewhere, the Observer has also sent a journalist there, and they both come up with different pieces and different responses. Which
and the Observer saying what? It's all the Tories' fault?
Much more of that, yes. And so I think that these are very difficult, complex questions. I mean, of course, in the Observer, their headline is "People just like rioting." And, I mean, to a certain extent, I think every 10 to 15 years we do have riots for different reasons, etc.
Yeah.
The key thing, of course, is the nature of those do change each time. I'm really struck in Rod Liddle's report as well by the fact that Middlesbrough has 1 in 200 residents there is a resettled asylum seeker.
Yes.
So that's the highest amount in any kind of area in the UK, and that is perhaps one potentially exacerbating factor, because as he points out, this is an area with traditionally high Irish immigration into the area, and that's why they've got a big, fantastic local Catholic church there. So I think these are really kind of interesting questions, and we're only just getting to grips now with kind of why the riots swept Britain and why they affected some of the most deprived areas in the country as well.
Also, there's this idea that although we're getting swift justice, is Keir Starmer actually grasping the nettle when it comes to giving us solutions to the problems of the lack of integration in some of these communities, particularly in the north?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what you're going to really struggle with. I mean, he is obviously former Director of Public Prosecutions. He's someone who's a process man. In some ways, that is the easy bit, to call for people to be locked up. And, of course, as the Observer report notes, the verdicts we've had so far are the ones where people plead guilty quickly. So they're the easiest ones to process and get them through. The much more thornier ones, when it comes down to identification, whether they're pleading not guilty or whatever, that'll take much longer. And then, of course, there's the issues around sort of a much bigger justice backlog. So I think that these are really difficult ones. And I think the biggest criticism I've heard about Keir Starmer, which rings most true, is the kind of failure of political imagination. He's good at responding to events. He's good as a kind of tactician and a strategist. But actually kind of coming up with a big vision and sort of uniting the country behind that, that will be a much more difficult challenge and the one he's got to grasp with over the next 5 years.
Also, I think it's interesting to read the story in the Sunday Telegraph suggesting that Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, wants to lift restrictions on social housing for migrants. So just to explain this, the Tories had suggested that the priority for social housing should go to people with British citizenship and that migrants should basically be put further down the list. Now Rayner is saying that that should be reversed. But isn't it those sorts of policies that create some of this division in communities?
I'd say so, certainly. I think this was about a change the government planning to introduce. Michael Gove introduced this idea in January of a UK connection test. So either, as you say, a British citizen or someone who'd been here for at least 10 years. And then this was obviously going to be address the unfairness that someone arrives here shouldn't be able to claim housing straight away. And yet, within a couple of weeks coming to office, Angela Rayner, who now is in charge of that local government department, has decided to lift that cap. And looking at the response in the paper, which the department has given to the paper, the Sunday Telegraph, it only says that, 90% of housing does go to people who've been here 10 years or more, or British residents. I think, well, that doesn't address the fundamental unfairness, which is that people feel as though there's one rule for them or one rule for someone else. So I think that these are the kind of things that do feed those grievances. I'm interested in the Sunday Times. There's a line that says that Morgan McSweeney, who, of course, is the great political thinker, the strategist, the Dominic Cummings behind Keir Starmer.
We're going to get on to him in a minute, his tensions with Sue Gray, but
absolutely,
go on.
yes. I mean, there's a line that he wants to be tough on populism and tough on the causes of populism. And there's a borrow from the Blair line.
I don't get this whole criticism of populism. I mean, the thing about populism is it is quite popular with the electorate.
Yes.
You know, things like social housing for people with British citizenship ahead of those who may have arrived here by dubious means. I mean, it's a pretty successful policy for whoever tables it. What surprises me about Angela Rayner is if there's anyone in that cabinet that could stand up for the so-called left behinds. Again, this is not a justification of any of the violence that's taken place. But if we have people who are white working class who feel that they are left behind, ignored, forgotten and not heard, who better in that cabinet than Angela Rayner to appeal to them? And yet she's been silent on all this.
Absolutely. And I think that you've got to remember, of course, 2019, when all these red wall areas are banned in Labour in droves, I think Reform came second in 90 of these seats. So I think they've got to be careful for that next time around.
Very much so. Fears of tax rises as the Chancellor is poised to boost the living wage by 4% in her first budget, according to the Sunday Telegraph. And we're also looking at a story in the Sunday Express which suggests that hiking death tax will send family businesses to the wall. So this is a suggestion that she is going to increase inheritance tax. I mean, we know who they aren't going to tax, James. They've said very clearly not going to tax working people. So no increase to national insurance or indeed income tax or VAT. However, she's got to have to find the money somewhere to give more pay rises, because they've already agreed to public sector pay rises, I think, going up to 5.2% or by 5.2%. And now this idea of boosting the living wage by 4%, which is brilliant. It sounds great if you're all for the worker, comrades. Not that great if you're running a small business. No, it isn't, of course. And you've also got to consider the wider economy as well, which is that obviously if you're in the public sector, trade union, that's fantastic. But of course, it means that if you want to get more money, bang for your buck from public services, it's great, obviously, you're paying the money for the staff, but equally about what are the returns you're going to see on the investment. The more money that's put into public services, the concern is people are getting less and less in terms of what the NHS is delivering for them, what the different public services, what schools are delivering for them. So I think that there's a real concern about this. And as you say, how are you going to pay for this as well? Coming at a time, of course, of inflation possibly going up again by the end of the year, which is a really big difference, I think. You know, we can talk about Rishi Sunak's government. Rishi Sunak's government, overwhelming priority was on inflation. It was a voteless recovery. We got inflation down from 11% down to 2%. And yet the danger is under Labour with these pay rises, which are very generous, of course. They could actually help fuel that going up again. But do Labour not see pay rises as inflationary? They just see them as an overwhelmingly good thing because it's all for the worker. But is there any consideration for the consequences, not least for small and medium-sized businesses who, let's be honest, have had a terrible time during COVID? They've had 6% shaved off their profit margins with the increase to corporation tax. Do the public realise, I suppose, James, that if wages go up, if somebody working in your local cafe is suddenly put on 12 or 13 quid an hour, that the cost of a coffee is going to go from £3 to £5?
I hope so. I think it's incumbent on people to make that argument and point that out, and that offering free money is not the sort of panacea to people's problems. And it's incumbent, I think, that's why the Conservatives need to making that argument and raising those kind of points. Because the danger is, obviously, otherwise the Labour get a free hit and they seem to be sort of these magnificent people giving out all the free money.
Yeah, I know, giving out all this cash to the workers. But it's the people that employ the workers that make the wealth, you could argue. Do you know what? John Redwood is coming in, Thatcher's former economic advisor.
Who better to make that argument?
We'll go through all of that in just a moment after the paper review. Sue's in charge. Mail on Sunday front page. Love this by Glenn Owen, the political editor. Security chiefs are saying that the PM is being kept in the dark by his aide, Sue Gray. We're all familiar with Sue Gray because of her work on Partygate. She's now Keir Starmer's chief of staff, but it seems as if she might be throwing her weight around. We've seen this before, James. Yes. What is it with people needing to be close to the Prime Minister? Apparently she's been moving Morgan McSweeney's desk around so he's not close and she's close. Everybody fighting for Keir Starmer's ear. It was ever thus.
It was ever thus. And Keir Starmer came in, his first speech out to Number 10, will have a politics that treads a little less lightly on your life. That remains to be seen, shall we say, because I think, as ever with Downing Street, there's all these rows going on, and everyone's jockeying for influence right now. Some of this was ever thus, but the interesting thing with Sue Gray, of course, is that she was the ultimate machine career servant, civil servant. She knew the entirety of Whitehall inside and out, and so it was a fascinating decision by Keir Starmer to take her into government. And the danger is, of course, according to these reports, is that perhaps she knows how to outwit the Prime Minister, a bit like, Sir Humphrey and all the rest of it.
There's this idea, there's a quote in the piece, she's the one really running the country. Is she, though? And what about Simon Case? There's tension there with the Cabinet Secretary.
Well, this is the whole historic beef that comes up, which is that, according to reports, Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, blocked her from being the Permanent Secretary at the Department for Business. As a result of that, she then became Chief of Staff to the Labour Party leader, Keir Starmer. Now Keir Starmer's become Prime Minister. It looks as though Simon Case is not going to be with us in a few months' time, according to various reports. And there'll be a new Cabinet Secretary. And, of course, that's the real crux, I think, of this story, which is that who will be the top civil servant in Britain. I suspect the hand of Sue Gray will certainly be involved in some capacity.
I think we can be sure of that. And then let's finish, because the Olympics are coming to a close. It's been a thoroughly brilliant couple of weeks, and actually a welcome distraction is sort of the best of British on display in Paris and the worst on display in some of these.
And the writing here.
Yeah, it's such a it's very, very, very much roles reversed. Yeah, we've been behaving like the French. But this wonderful story about Georgia Bell, we know her dad because we work with Andy Bell, who's the political editor of Channel 5. Lovely, lovely chap. But what's amazing about Georgia Bell winning this bronze medal in the 1500 is she basically was working in cyber tech. She had been a youth runner and very successful as a teenager, plagued by injury. She does a park run. She turns in this amazing... Have you ever done a park run, James?
No, I haven't.
Well, I tell you what, to do a park run in 16 minutes, which is what she cleared that 5K in, I think I can just about manage to scrape just under 30 minutes. So that's how good she is. And now she's a medalist, and she's 30 years old, and it's just a wonderful story.
It's a wonderful story. If you watch the race as well, obviously, she was in fourth for most of it and came up and just amazing last burst over the line. And I was so delighted for her and her family as well. And, I think last time she was watching the Olympics at home and during Tokyo and COVID, and, as you say, decided to start running again and picked it up. And at the age of 30 to do that is a phenomenal result. And I'm so happy for her and her father as well.
If she can move up the podium in 4 years' time at the age of 34, we shall be in awe of her.
Absolutely.
James, thanks so much. You're going to stay around because we're going to have an interview that Olivia Rutley's doing with the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, and then you and John Redwood are going to analyse that a little later. But for now, thank you very much indeed. And as I say, coming up next, it is Sir John Redwood. He's the man who advised Thatcher on the economy. He's got some very interesting insight into Rishi Sunak calling that early election and whether it was a good idea. So stay tuned for that.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Karen Stevenson was born in Stoke-on-Trent and read music at Trinity College, Cambridge. She's played cello with many of the world's great orchestras under the batons of some of the most renowned conductors, and she joins me now to discuss her career and the importance of music in education. Tell me about that. What is your role at the Philharmonia?
My role at the Philharmonia is number 2 cello. I've been there for about 15 years. Sometimes I play number 1 cello as well, which is a great opportunity for me. Well,
it's interesting you say that, because I often think what a very difficult life it is to be a professional musician.
I make a living out of it. It is definitely possible. We don't really like it when we get into a taxi and someone says, "What's your day job?" Because we work really hard.
I was kind of making the opposite point. Not that you'd also have a day job. I think the perfection that is required for a professional musician is extraordinary. On the whole, we are intolerant of mistakes in classical music.
Yes, we are.
And I just wondered whether you don't become very frustrated with a world in which everything else is imperfect.
You are only as good as your last concert, Michael. That's how it feels. It is a lot of pressure. Sometimes we will say, OK, a pint for every wrong note or something, but depending on the piece of music, that could be quite dangerous.
How many hours a day do you have to practice?
You have to practice much more when you're younger, I think, when you're learning. I think this is really important. And when you're at music college. I'm a busy, you know, I'm travelling, I have a family. I can't practice as much as I used to, so you have to rely on your experience. What I really wanted to say is that there's been a lot of fear-mongering about classical music being in decline and it not being relevant, and I really wanted to say that I don't think that's the case. Our audiences have increased. They're the highest they've been in 10 years.
The People's Channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
As time passes,
She could have saved Storm.
you made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
I can become something different. Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News. You're watching the Camilla Tominey show. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by Sir John Redwood, who stood down at the last election, having been the Conservative MP for Wokingham since 1987. John, let's just start with that, because you were going to stand and then you felt that the early election call was a mistake and that you might lose. Just tell, I mean, what happened? Why do you think Rishi Sunak decided to do this? Because Nadine Dorries is apparently writing a book about all this, and maybe he had second thoughts at the last minute. It's been reported today, but he had already told the King. But it seemed nuts from an economic perspective, because the green shoots of recovery were starting to show.
Yeah, I didn't think I was necessarily going to lose. I thought the Conservative Party as a whole was going to go down to a tragically big defeat, and that proved to be right. And then the campaign made it even more likely that we would do worse than the original polling. Original polling showed Wokingham was just about winnable. No, my decision was that I'd been working, I thought, closely with Hunt, Sunak and their advisers on general economic policy, and I thought if we left it until November, December, things were going to look a lot better. We could have had some mortgage rate cuts. Even the Bank of England got round to cutting interest rates as soon as the election was over, and there could be more to come. I thought that we could do a much quicker job on getting public sector productivity back up to 2019 levels, which would have freed about 20 billion of extra money for tax cuts, which would have been very helpful. I wanted another so-called fiscal event or budget in September, October, and had put forward a series of tax cuts that had been targeted on self-employed, small businesses, on cost of goods and so forth. And if you had another 6 months of actual real incomes rising, because real incomes had started to rise just before the election, I thought that was all a better background where we'd have limited the damage. Yeah. And I was working away with them on these things.
You've been vindicated in these feelings. So
and then they just said no, so I had to make a very quick decision. I thought, I can't defend this. I can't defend the decision to go early. I can't defend where we are at the moment. You couldn't do it with words. You had to do it with deeds. We needed another 6 months, for example, to show that we were getting legal migration under control. It was another thing I and a few others had persuaded the government to do. They eventually got round to it in January. If we'd had a whole year of showing the numbers coming down, people would have been reassured.
But take us inside some of these conversations, because there's you talking political sense. You're representing the electorate's desires. This is what Conservatives are asking for. Can we bring down legal migration? Can we please have incentives for businesses to thrive? Can we please be taxed less? Could we be more productive so that our public services work better for us? You go in and you say this to the likes of Sunak and Hunt, and they're nodding, saying we agree, but we can't implement it because officials in the background are saying no, no, no.
Well, sometimes they agreed. I mean, as with the legal migration, they did actually put in some very sensible measures in January, but they didn't hang around to see the benefits. Labour can now claim some credit because the numbers have started to fall, still too high, but coming in the right direction. On something like the Bank of England, where they are willfully selling bonds at huge losses that they needn't be doing, they didn't want to intervene with the Bank of England. Well, that was always a joint policy. Chancellors signed off on the buying and selling of bonds. That was part of the deal. And the Bank of England made it very clear that they were acting as agents of the Treasury. And we, the taxpayer, are paying for those losses. So I was scandalised that I couldn't persuade the Prime Minister and the Chancellor to say to the Governor, look, the ECB is not doing this, the Federal Reserve Board is not doing this, though they have the same problems as the Bank of England. So why on earth is Britain having to charge its taxpayers billions of pounds every year For selling bonds, you needn't sell at a loss.
No, well, this is I mean, it's quite granular, this, and I'm practically functionally enumerate, so I struggle to understand anything economic. But I think I get the basis of what you're saying, is that the Bank of England is selling bonds at a loss and actually costing us money, and yet there seems to be no accountability by the Bank of England for doing this. As you say, other central banks aren't doing it. So what's happened here, John? Is the Bank of England out of control? Is it's now setting fiscal policy? Independence has spiralled beyond what was originally intended by Gordon Brown? What's happened?
Yes, indeed, because I wasn't a critic of their independent right to set the short-term interest rate and to do what they do through the Monetary Policy Committee. But that was the limit of their independence. And when Brown and co wanted to print a load of money and buy a load of bonds because of the collapse they engineered in 08-09, the bank very sensibly said, this is too hot for us to handle. We're going to send it all through to you, and we need a Chancellor's signature on this, and Parliament could have opened that decision up for comment if they wished to. So that continued. So all of the money printed over COVID was signed off by the government. And I was critical of the latter stages of that. I agreed with the first 300 billion, which was a colossal sum of money, because they were collapsing the economy. The next 150 billion was in the recovery period. I always thought that was inflationary.
Yes.
And yet they still did it.
Because what you're saying, I interviewed Liz Truss recently, and she is resentful about the idea of her mini-budget crashing the economy, says the figures don't suggest it did crash it. And actually, Andrew Bailey, the Governor of the Bank of England, and the Bank of England they weren't honest with her about this LDI's problem. So, I mean, is there a finger to be blamed, a finger of blame to be pointed at Andrew Bailey and co? Seems to me that the Bank of England has extended its reach far beyond its original remit and isn't performing particularly well for the British taxpayer. Is that a fair analysis?
Well, indeed. I mean, the Bank of England itself has recently come out with some analysis saying the bulk of the interest rate rises that occurred were the result of the LDI crisis and their actions in raising rates. They wanted interest rates higher. That was why they went up. And it wasn't just in Britain, because the Federal Reserve Board was doing exactly the same thing in America. So you had bond prices falling and interest rates going up universally. There's an argument about whether the Truss budget caused an extreme version of that. I mean, I think the Truss budget was ill-judged. The spending was far too high. I couldn't understand why they were subsidising your and my energy bill. We didn't need that, and we couldn't afford it. But that wasn't the main problem. And as you rightly say, the main problem was the Bank of England had lost control of the pension fund investments in bonds, including their own. They had a huge position in these very damaging funds that were highly leveraged. And so I think that's probably why they reversed policy. And they showed that as soon as they reversed policy, the market stabilised. So it was mainly the Bank of England that destabilised the market, and they knew how to stabilise it. The other thing that people forget is that interest rates went higher a year later after stabilisation than they were during the Liz Truss period.
But as a unashamed sort of Thatcherite, how do you feel about this idea that the Tories have squandered their reputation for economic competence? I mean, you now look at YouGov polling, for instance. It says that Labour is more fiscally disciplined than the Conservatives. That must depress you as a lifelong Conservative.
Well, it annoys me because I was trying to get them not to be fiscally irresponsible. I mean, going right back to COVID, where Iron, led by Mark Harper, led the charge to lock down less and to lock down for a shorter time period because it was just unaffordable. It was crazy. And that was the main cause of all those problems. That led to the excessive money printing and the inflation which we got, which has damaged the reputation. I fear that Labour are not going to be fiscally cautious in the way they advertise because they've already put out a very big unfunded set of pay rises for the public sector with no matching productivity.
Now, I would like a better of the effect.
I'd want a better paid public sector, but it has to be earned, and there are lots of productivity changes that could be made that would justify all that. Well, my worry is that far from turning us into the fastest growing economy of the G7, a great aim which I fully support, they'll do the opposite, because practically every measure they've announced or heralded so far is anti-growth.
Yes.
And they are going to make it much more expensive to have energy in Britain. They are going to close down our car industry, making petrol and diesels more quickly than the previous government was. They're going to carry on with the policy of taking us out of basic steel making. They don't seem to be very energetic in promoting more homegrown food. All the things you could be doing to grow the economy sector by sector, they're doing the opposite.
And what effect as well, we read this morning, that they're not going to be actively encouraging civil servants and others to be working from the office. Apparently the Home Office is struggling to get employees to work in the Home Office in person for more than 2 days a week. Do you think that has an effect? I know Jacob Rees-Mogg did a lot of work in this area.
Well, I think it can do. But I mean, I work at home quite a lot, so I don't rule it out.
No.
But it needs properly managing, and I think there are more occasions when people need to be in an office talking to colleagues and being mentored by seniors and understanding from their managers directly. It's much more difficult doing it on video links. So, yes, I think you need strong managers in those departments who carry their staff with them and get the balance right. And I think probably the balance isn't right at the moment. Can
we just move you on to the Tory leadership race? What do you make of it? Is it too long? It's a marathon, not a sprint. We don't get the results from the membership vote on the final two until I think it's November the 2nd or 3rd.
No, I'm not critical of that. I mean, I think there's an argument for it being longer because I think the members need to be engaged, because there's a great danger that the members are going to drift off. We've lost a lot of members already because of bad policy in the last few years. A lot of members didn't like the immigration policy, they didn't like the economic and tax policy. So I think you need to woo the members back. So I think engaging them very fully in the way this does is an extremely good idea. And I think those who are contesting it, and there are rather a lot contesting it at the moment, who stayed in the government throughout and never gave any indication that they thought something was wrong, have got a lot of work to do to persuade people, because they were taking the ship down.
Does that mean that you might be backing Robert Jenrick because he did resign over immigration policy?
I'm not making any statement about who I'm supporting at the moment. I want to let them all have a chance to set out their policy positions. I'm a fair-minded man and I'm just a member with a vote. And at the moment, what matters is what the MPs are going to do, because, of course, they have the crucial votes to whittle it down to 4 and 2. But I hope they will do so in conjunction with their members, those members who remain, because we feel we have a right to a say as well. But no, I will want them to set out a better programme, but I want them to be much more explicit about why it went wrong and why they didn't do anything about it.
John, we'll hear more from you in just a moment, because we're going to get an interview with Jonathan Reynolds, the Business Secretary, and John and James Hill are going to react to it. So don't go anywhere. Stay tuned for that. We'll be back in 3.
Celebrate a spectacular summer with your chance to win an incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash in our Great British Giveaway. It's the biggest prize of the year so far, and it's totally tax-free. What would you spend that on? Luxury holidays, a new car, or just put it away for a rainy day? Whatever you do with £30,000 in tax-free cash, make sure you don't miss out on a chance to make it yours. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Esther, can we talk about Andy Murray? Because Andy Murray has retired, which is great news. And in the papers today, his lovely wife, Kim, said, this is good, I'm glad he's retired, because he can do some childcare now and a bit of housework. But you know all about relationships. Yes. This is going to be an adjustment for them, isn't it?
Absolutely. And you know, as a father and a husband as well, Mark, that when you are at home, you are actually a big pain in the... Because you are kind of wired and you want to be doing stuff. And Andy Murray's like goal-driven. Can you imagine? He's going to be like, I'm going to make chili con carne. I'm going to make chili like this and this. And, you know, he's going to be like so focused and he's going to have so much energy. I would be terrified to live in the same house as Andy Murray. I know he kind of comes across as quite laid back, you know. He's a bit of a Sean Connery.
But actually, these people are driven, and that's not going to stop just because he's retired, right?
OK, when you've got a driven parent and the parent is at home, they're a nightmare. Yeah. So he needs to be seriously occupied. We've got to think of some hobbies.
Isn't it Kim's turn?
To have her career?
For her to be the most important person in the house.
I think she's quite into her art and painting and things like that.
So isn't it time for him to stay at home, feed the kids and all that, empty the dishwasher, and let her career be the most important?
Although I doubt he'll do that. He'll have so much other stuff to do. Punditry. Maybe he'll join his mum. She has a tennis academy.
Actually, I remember there's a documentary about both of them have a hotel in Scotland. Actually, I think they co-run and I think they refurbished it.
Yeah.
To be fair, Kim, not just the hotel, but I'm sure she'll have other business ventures. You're right. I think it's the right thing to do. Clearly, Andy Murray has had to be out the house. Probably she's had to look after the kids. I think anyone that's at the top of their game when they retire, I think the only fair thing to do is to, as you say, maybe take a step back and support your wife.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. Much more to come in the next hour. I'm going to be joined by the Tory leadership candidate Mel Stride. But first, here's the news with Sophia Wensler.
Camilla, thank you. Good morning. It's 10 o'clock. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. The Justice Secretary has warned that the impact of the riots seen across the UK could be felt for months and years to come. Shabana Mahmood made the remarks in a piece in The Observer as she counts as the courts have been working to extend the hours to deal with rioters. It comes as counter-demonstrations in London yesterday turned heated as 2,000 protesters gathered outside Reform HQ, where GB News reporter Charlie Peters and his cameraman were targeted.
Don't touch me! Don't touch me! Don't touch me! I will... He's touching me! Film it, Stevie. Film it. Get your stuff. Get it back. I'm not putting it back. My job is your safety. No. Yeah.
Meanwhile, hundreds of people involved in the riots are now set to appear in courts as a top prosecutor has warned that they could face 10 years in prison. Business and Trade Secretary Jonathan Reynolds says the government is prepared.
Yes, there is sufficient capacity in the prison system because of decisions that were made in the early days of the new government. We have seen, I think, 780 arrests, 350 people charged already, and there will be more to come, and it will be the case that people will face the full force of the law. I think it's important that the public see not just a judicial system that's working well, but effective public services again in Britain.
Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer has suggested the government will review our social media laws in the wake of the riots, saying they need to look more broadly at the sector. Sir Keir warned that social media is not a law-free zone, as more sentences for online offences linked to the riots are expected. It comes as the Education Secretary says children will be taught how to spot extremist content and fake news online. Bridget Phillipson said she's launching a review of the curriculum in both primary and secondary schools to arm children against putrid conspiracy theories. In other news, President Zelensky has for the first time acknowledged that Ukraine is conducting a military offensive inside Russia's western Kursk region. The surprise operation, which began 5 days ago, has taken Russia by surprise and prompted mass evacuations across both sides of the border. Russia's defence ministry has said air defence units destroyed 14 drones and 4 ballistic missiles over the region this morning. It comes 900 days after the war in Ukraine began and marks a major development in the conflict between both nations. Military analyst Sean Bell says there are 3 main reasons for Ukraine's offensive.
Ukraine's got a very long border with Russia. Undoubtedly, it'll put Russia on the back foot. Secondly, is to demonstrate that Russia is not in control in this conflict at the moment, that actually there are 2 sides here. And thirdly, just imagine the morale for Ukrainian fighters that are actually starting to take the fight into Russia. Now, I spoke to a Ukrainian the other day who said they wanted to see a Ukrainian flag planted in Moscow.
And back in the UK, the Housing Secretary has dropped Conservative plans to prevent recently arrived migrants from applying for a council house in England. The previous government had planned to introduce a UK connection test, which would have restricted social housing to those who had been resident for at least 10 years. But Angela Rayner has scrapped the plan and vowed to ramp up the provision of new social homes as part of a wider planning reforms to boost house building. It comes as almost 1.3 million households are on the local authority waiting list for social housing. In the US, Donald Trump's campaign has said some of its internal communications have been hacked and suggested it was targeted by Iranian operatives. It comes after US news website Politico reported that it had been emailed campaign documents, including internal research carried out on Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance. A campaign spokesperson said these documents were obtained illegally from foreign sources hostile to the United States, intended to interfere with the 2024 election. The Algerian boxer at the centre of a gender row at the Paris Olympics has filed a legal complaint saying she's been a victim of online harassment. Amani Khalif, who won the gold medal in the women's welterweight category at Friday against China's Liu Yang, she had faced backlash before the fight after failing a gender test at the 2023 Women's World Championships. On Saturday, the gold-winning boxer said, "All that is being said about me on social media is immoral, and I want to change the minds of people around the world." Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler. More in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lots more still to come. In just a minute, we're going to hear from the Secretary of State for Trade, Jonathan Reynolds. James Heal and Sir John Redwood will be here to analyse what he has had to say. I'll also be joined by former Work and Pension Secretary Mel Stride, who would like to replace Rishi Sunak as the next Conservative leader. Can Stride reunite the right? And I'll be joined by former Met Detective Chief Superintendent Kevin Hurley to ask him what he makes of the government and the police's handling of the riots, and two former prison governors with 60 years of experience between them in the criminal justice system will be here to comment on the riots and indeed the prisons crisis. Well, earlier on today, the Business and Trade Secretary Jonathan Reynolds spoke to GB News, and this is what he had to say.
Well, you've seen an incredibly swift and publicly visible response from the new government to the disorder that we have seen. I think that is important and I think it is necessary. Yes, there is sufficient capacity in the prison system because of decisions that were made in the early days of the new government. We have seen, I think, 780 arrests, 350 people charged already, and there will be more to come, and it will be the case that people will face the full force of the law. I think it's important that the public see not just a judicial system that's working well, but effective public services again in Britain.
Can you guarantee that rioters won't be released early under the overcrowding release scheme?
No, I understand that they won't be, but because of those difficult decisions that were made by new ministers in the new government to make sure there is sufficient capacity moving on from the disastrous state that we inherited, it's because of those decisions there is capacity in the system to deal with this disorder.
What's been the extent of the impact on small businesses? Is there any estimate on the total cost of the disorder for businesses and police, courts, etc.?
No, it's very significant. I've been, for instance, in Liverpool on Friday talking to a small business owner affected. You'll understand that because of the position they're in, even getting back open has been a burden for them, and therefore we're probably not in a position at this stage to be able to assess the scale of the loss. We want to make sure the recovery is as swift and effective as the response has been. So that is, first of all, working with the Association of British Insurers to make sure claims are paid promptly, and then where businesses are underinsured or they're not insured, making sure they're aware there is still potentially support available to them under the terms of the Riot Compensation Act. A lot of people not aware of that, but making sure, first of all, the small businesses are getting the support that they need, but also that the message goes out that if the public care about these businesses, recognise, as I do, they're at the heart of local communities, public need to get out there and support them, and that's my message to them as well today. If you care about these brilliant local businesses that are at the heart of your community, please give them your support in the days and weeks ahead.
That was Jonathan Reynolds, the Business Secretary there. John Redwood, what do you make of the government's handling of these riots and Keir Starmer obviously trying to be tough on law and order, but not having really addressed some of the causes for this unrest?
Well, I think the government was right to see that this was wicked criminal damage and that there needed to be a strong response. And I understand why they didn't want to muddle that with other issues. But obviously, going forward, assuming they're now on top of this, we need to go back to a rational conversation about how you have growth in the economy, how you have more settled communities and so forth.
Do you think it's been largely about immigration, or are there other cost of living factors in consideration here? Is it that some white working class people, particularly in northern towns, feel left behind, do you think?
Well, I don't know, because I don't know these people who've been committing these offences, and they are criminals, and the government's right to treat them as criminals. There's no excuse for throwing things at shops or looting or whatever. But if we want to have a conversation about what do you do to have a proper growth strategy, I think that would be a very important part of the answer to the more general economic and political problems we face. And we were just hearing from the business secretary there saying, well, there's some help for small businesses that have been at the centre of this storm and are particularly damaged, but the whole small business community needs a lift.
Yes.
How do you get growth? How do you get better paid jobs? How do you get better service to the local community? You need a bigger population of self-employed and small businesses. We've had a big reduction in self-employed in recent years because of the tax changes and because of the COVID closures and lockdowns. And I think we need to grow the self-employed sector again. I think that requires favourable tax change. And I think the small businesses are restrained by the VAT threshold being too low. And so they get to a certain point and they don't grow any further. And we need to deal with that. And I don't see that from this government. And we hear the business secretary just talking about defensive things. I want him to be optimistic about self-employed and small business, and he's not being that.
James, I mean, if it turns out that some of these rioters that have been swiftly dealt with end up being released early under Labour's own early prisoner release scheme, it'll be a bit of an embarrassment politically, won't it?
It will be there. I mean, I noticed, of course, that when he was asked the question, the business secretary very quickly changed tack and moved elsewhere. So I think we need to see some more detail about that in the coming weeks or so, particularly when Parliament comes back. I suspect that it will be that they won't get released early, because I think there'll be some political pressure and such in the system that to ensure that won't happen. But I was struck by that. I was also struck by the line about, the fact they don't have a figure yet for how much this is going to cost the state, which will be really interesting. There's a story today in The Independent which shows that I think the government is now facing £47 billion in historic costs to do with things like tainted blood, for instance. So you can imagine all these different things, all these pressures. I suspect these rights will cost a couple of billion added onto the bill, and that means all the millions that get spent on this don't get spent on, for instance, tax changes, things like small business relief, etc. So I think that's going to be something to watch out for in the coming months or so.
The other thing we heard of just in the news bulletin before by Sophia was this idea that Bridget Phillipson has introduced into the national curriculum some sort of lesson for children on discerning between real news and fake news. And we're both journalists in the right-wing media. You're at The Spectator, I'm here and at The Telegraph. I mean, obviously, the importance of proper journalism trumping this sort of amateur reportage that seems to publish with impunity, doesn't have any sort of credence, shares information and misinformation too quickly, no legal checks or balances. Is this a good thing, do you think, for schools?
No, I don't think so, because I think that the thing is actually Labour have got this all mixed up, which is actually you need critical thinking, and therefore you produce the right outcomes. Having people who are independent thinkers, able to kind of analyse what they're being told, talk about the provenance, that's the way to approach this. I think they've got this the wrong way around, which is they want to come to it, they want to have these model people, but it's actually only the thinking through and the kind of interrogation of sourcing is what actually produces this. And my concern is the teachers, of course, who've now got to teach the academic curriculum, as well as things like sexual harassment, Andrew Tate lessons, for instance. We've had discussion. It's great to prescribe all these things, but I worry for the teachers on the ground who are going to have to teach all these things through.
Really quick word on that, John?
Well, I think good teaching of critical factors is absolutely crucial, but what I'm worried about is the idea they might want to legislate against so-called fake news, and one person's fake news is another person's belief. And governments are pretty good at sending out fake news, and they might fall foul of their own law if they're particularly clumsy. Surely the best thing is good, honest, democratic debate so that we can challenge each other where we disagree, and transparency by the public authorities so they publish accurate data, and we can then all get on with interpreting it. What I don't want is a single official agreed line on everything, and everybody who deviates is then some kind of rogue.
Yeah, if you don't agree with me, then you're wrong.
No, that would be a dreadful
That's not the approach we want necessarily in our education system. James Heal, John Redwood, thanks so much for joining me this morning. It's lovely to speak to you both.
Thank you.
Well, coming up next, we're going to be speaking to Mel Stride. He might be the rank outsider in the leadership race, but what has he got to say about reuniting the Conservative Party? I'll be back in 2.
This is GB News. Britain's news channel.
This is a big old headache because we talk a lot about GP appointments, don't we? But it's certainly almost everyone I know struggles to see a dentist when they need one.
Yes. You know the best time to go to a dentist? When? 2:30. 2:30.
That's actually quite good. It's better than my gags.
The guy that went into Goa, to India, to get his dental treatment, is that what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, so tell us about that. I mean, this is how desperate people are to get treatment now. So what's the story?
OK, the story is a guy couldn't get an appointment at the NHS, so he went all the way to Goa in India to get his dental appointment. Now, I think he probably just wanted to go on holiday, and he thought, I know, why don't I go on holiday to Goa and then get my teeth done? Look, people are travelling in their droves. There's whole aeroplanes full of people with medical tourists. Like in Turkey, you get a whole aeroplane with people with hair implants, things like that.
Well,
so,
yeah. I was going to go to
turkey teeth, isn't it?
Turkey teeth.
Turkey teeth. Well, now
that's when they strip the tooth down and you have these little pegs.
Yes, they strip them down. But in many cases, they strip them down far too low, so the nerve is exposed and it gets infected, and it's exposed to the elements. So you get infection in the tooth, and then you have to essentially take them all off. But by then, the infection spreads so far. I was getting my nails done the other day, which I don't do very often, and my nail technician said to me, "Is your dad still a dentist?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Please, can I have an emergency appointment?" I went to Turkey and I got my teeth done, and now they look incredible, but I'm in so much pain. They're all infected. She had 15 taken out from the top and 12 from the bottom, and it's an absolute disaster. But this is what people are feeling like they have to do.
So medical tourism doesn't always work.
No, but it shows, doesn't it, Alex, that people can't get their teeth sorted here, so they go elsewhere. Listen, do you floss, by the way?
Don't floss. GB News, the People's Channel. Sunday nights on GB News. From 6, Neil Oliver. At 7, it's Free Speech Nation with Andrew Doyle. At 9, Mark Dolan. And at 11, get set for the week ahead with headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. As you know, GB News, and in particular this show, are doing a leadership series where we're trying to interview each of the 6 candidates ahead of them being narrowed down to 2 by November. And last week we had Robert Jenrick, and this week we've got Mel Stride, the MP for Central Devon, in the studio with us. Lovely to see you, Mel. You've had a busy time going around the country, visiting Conservative associations, telling people that you're not the underdog, or you're an underdog that has got a bite. I think
well, absolutely. Look, David Cameron, who had that famous victory in 2005, was 25 to 1 with the bookies 1 week before the conference at which he gave that speech, and swept all before him. This is a long race, and I'm coming up the rails, all right?
All right. Why do it, though, Mel? I mean, what's it all about? Because yes, you did make your name not only as Work and Pension Secretary, you introduced a lot of measures on worklessness, which I think were certainly welcomed warmly by the right of the party. Yeah. And you were Mr Broadcast Round, so we saw you a lot on GB News during the election campaign. I don't think anyone had previously singled you out as somebody with leadership ambitions. What's it all about?
So I think we're at a critical juncture for our party. We've clearly lost our way very badly. And I think in terms of reuniting the party, getting the right political platform together and reorganising ourselves as a fighting machine, I am best placed to deliver that and to connect with the electorate. We've got to rediscover our vision as a party. Now, my background was I went into Parliament age 48. Everybody tells me we need politicians that haven't been politicians all their lives.
Yes.
We want people with real-world experience. Well, that is me. What I did was I went out and set up my own businesses here in the UK and also in the United States. That meant getting together with people around the kitchen table, getting ideas together, unifying people, enthusing them, climbing those mountains and making things happen. And I believe that's what the Conservative Party really needs now. Now, work and pensions that you mentioned, Camilla, I've driven some of the most fundamental reforms in a generation, seeing billions of pounds saved from the welfare budget at the same time as having hundreds of thousands of people on that journey to work. That's the level of reform and drive for reform that we need in the Conservative Party now.
Those reforms are welcome, but funny enough, I had a little conversation with John Redwood before he came on air, and we were just talking about you and the welfare reforms. The only problem with them were that they were stalled by a year. So Redwood was saying there were lots of righties in the party who wanted them to be implemented immediately, and then they were pushed into 2025. Right. So you haven't necessarily landed them, because Labour could now reverse them, couldn't they?
So, look, I was 18 months in post. Reform that is fundamental and affects millions of people and their livelihoods. They're big decisions. You have to consult on them quite properly. Otherwise, you get challenged in the courts and they get overturned. Yeah. So you have to do things in the right way. But we proceeded at pace. Now, the Office for Budget Responsibility, which is an independent body, assesses my reforms as meaning 400,000 fewer people going into those long-term sickness and disability benefits than would otherwise be the case. And they've also scored, with the Treasury, billions of pounds worth of savings. Now, you can't do that at the flick of a switch. No. It takes a lot of hard work, working with officials to get that done. But I got it done. And I know that I can bring that to the Conservative Party.
OK, so when you looked under the bonnet, what was the issue? Obviously, post-COVID, we had more people out of work. People will blame 14 years of Conservative rule for encouraging more people into benefits and out of work. I mean, the party has to take some responsibility. I appreciate the work you did in the last 18 months, but how did it get to a situation where I think Fraser Nelson at The Spectator had done a lot of work in this area, sort of 9 million people who could work not working?
So, look, let's just...
Very anti-Thatcherite, isn't it?
Let's just unpack this and get the reality of what's happened, OK? The first thing is our record on employment is excellent as a government. So we've had near highest level of employment in our history, near lowest level, in fact, half the level.
Went wrong.
But that's important. Secondly, on economic inactivity, which is where you get the 9 million figure from, that, for example, includes students. There are over 2 million.
And I think early retirees, perhaps.
Early retirees, etc. But if you compare to where we are on economic inactivity compared to when Labour was in office, we have a lower level than every year under the last Labour government, and we're lower than the average across the OECD, the G7, and across the EU. So the overall picture, relatively, is not bad. But, Camilla, and this is where you're right, long-term sickness and disability, off the back of COVID, particularly a rise in mental health issues amongst particularly young people, has been a major driver of that. And that's why my reforms around the work capability assessment, which is the gateway into these benefits, has meant 400,000 fewer people going onto those benefits. And I was also consulting on personal independence payments to see how that could be more effective and more efficient as well.
Solve this dilemma for us, because this was in the papers this morning, and there was a report in the Mail on Sunday which had kind of exposed a few rogue doctors that are signing people off sick with no meeting with them, not even online, no evidence for the fact they're sick. One girl, I think, said she basically wanted to spend some time at the beach because she needed a holiday. She gets a sick note for 25 quid. How do we crack down on that? Because it seems to me that if you're a patient and you turn up at your doctor's and say, I'm stressed out, I need 4 weeks off work, you just get it.
The overall problem with sick notes is as follows, that doctors on average have about 6 minutes to give you when you come along and say, I'm not feeling great, I need to be signed off. On 94% of occasions, they tick a box that says, totally incapable of any work whatsoever, which doesn't do you a lot of good when you're sitting there feeling very down to be told that you can't possibly work. No. In only 6% of occasions do they tick a box that says, well, might be available with appropriate support. I brought something called Workwell in, which means that instead of just having that box ticked, you actually get referred to an employment specialist alongside the mental health support that you need in a one-stop shop. And the first thing that they aim to do, Camilla, is to keep you in work because it's good for you. Now, that might mean liaising with your employer, and if you've got a bad hip, you know, moving your desk down to the ground floor instead of it being on the up floor. It could be small changes.
Make life easier.
But stop that journey that starts with people falling out of work and ending up on long-term
benefits. Those doctors, what do we do about them, Mel? If they're signing people off sick online for 25 quid, should they be struck off? What should happen to them?
If anybody in the medical profession is behaving unprofessionally and simply dishing out sick notes where people pay them and for no other reason, they're not being diligent, then clearly action should be taken.
What do you mean?
The General Medical Council or...
Yeah,
exactly. Somebody like that should be looking at that particular issue. But there is a broader issue of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of these fit notes being signed off every year and people going on this longer-term journey to longer-term benefits and getting very distant from the workforce.
All right.
So my plan, which was being rolled out and Labour may scrap, was to get in early, head it off at the pass, keep people in work rather than letting them drift out.
I've got lots more to ask you. A couple of personal questions first, though. You've only got a majority of 61.
Yes.
So you're in a really precarious position come 2029 to lead the party on such a small majority.
OK, well, look, I'm very proud of the fact that I won when many much, much safer seats than mine were lost.
But, you know, a future Conservative leader might want to brag that they've won more convincingly than you did.
Well, no, I managed to win, as I say, when I should have lost, OK? The exit poll, I was told by Nick Robinson just after 10 o'clock, Mr Stride, what do you have to say? You've clearly lost. Well, I didn't. I hung on because I'm a fighter and I was out there fighting against the good. Look, we've got to get beyond worrying about a seat like mine if we're going to get back into contention.
So
we've got to be winning my seat with a 15 to 20,000 majority, which is what it was, and we've got to be bringing back all those seats which were previously safe and more.
And how about when people say, look, you're never going to win this, you're just doing it to boost your profile?
No, not at all. As I say, David Cameron, for example, who was a rank outsider, as you described me earlier, a week before he went out and delivered that extraordinary speech at party conference and came through and won, was 25 to 1.
Up your sleeve,
I think I gave an extraordinary one last night in Gloucestershire, which went down extremely well at the hustings. All 6 of us. And I had people flocking to me afterwards saying, the more we see of you, Mel Stride, the more we like it.
Right,
so,
this is the Conservative...
And there's time.
This is the Conservative broad church spectrum.
Yep.
We've got, on the right here, John Redwood and Margaret Thatcher. And on the left of the party here, we could say, as you've just mentioned him, David Cameron and George Osborne. This is a spectrum. Where's Mel Stride?
OK, so I don't think these spectrums are labels. No, because you've set up this false question. I don't accept the premise that you've laid out, because I think if you take your so-called right end of the spectrum, you will probably say low net migration, low illegal migration, low taxes.
Everything the Conservatives promised but didn't deliver.
They're not a preserve of the right. They're things I passionately believe in, and people on the so-called left of the party. They're common ground issues.
Well, so many people come into the studio saying that they believe in low tax and low immigration, and yet lo and behold, the Tories face an Armageddon because they don't deliver on either of those promises.
But I'll tell you...
not just in this Parliament, but in previous ones.
Look, let me tell you how we're going to deliver on lower taxes, OK, and the importance of doing so. How we deliver is by running a more efficient government and public sector.
OK.
We deliver reforms in welfare, which I have already started.
How do you gain efficiencies? Do you sack civil servants?
No, what
do
about...
you cut government departments?
You improve productivity,
right.
OK? And productivity of the public sector in some places like the NHS has even been going backwards despite the large amounts of additional funding that's gone in. But on welfare, where we went into the last election, our manifesto had huge tax cuts. 2/3 of those tax cuts, £12 billion worth, was paid for by the reforms that I was bringing through in welfare. There's enough in welfare to make a difference. Now, why tax cuts really matter is we've got an intergenerational challenge as a party. We've got to reach out to younger voters.
Yeah.
We're going to have to come up with a very big, bold offer for younger people. Tax is going to play a part in that. I think we can have creative approaches to that.
Yes.
We could, for example, say to those taking on their first job that perhaps, say, the first £5,000 of their national insurance doesn't go to the taxman, it goes into a hypothecated fund that's there, for example, as a deposit on a property. We've got to be creative, but we've got to find the fiscal space in order to do that. And that's why I'm the person to do it, because I've demonstrated
All right, so you're good at creating fiscal space. Tell me then, which tax do you cut first?
So one of the taxes that are no-brainers are the so-called Laffer taxes, where you can cut them and get more revenue.
The old Laffer curve, I vaguely remember
Arthur Laffer and his napkin in the restaurant.
That's right.
In other words, if you tax people 100%, you get nothing. If you tax them 0, you get nothing.
State the ones that you would like to tax.
So stamp duty, property, stamp duty, land tax, because it's transaction-based tax. It's 12% at the higher level, ludicrously high. And it means that all those painters and decorators and white van man that comes in and gets involved and helps their businesses...
So we've got that one.
Don't get that because of the transaction.
Corporation tax, should that come down?
Corporation tax, we want to see low. It is the lowest.
Businessman?
It is the lowest.
It should be lowest,
in the G7 at the moment. So we shouldn't get too carried away with it
your business when you had corporation tax.
I did. Nigel Lawson did fantastic things.
Rates. Well, why don't you return to Lawsonian government?
We definitely. I've said we definitely need to be looking at corporation tax, small business tax as well. The taxes we really need to lean on and get down are the ones that drive employment and jobs and growth.
Yes.
So we need tax release on investment.
I love all this, Mel, but I sit here and listen to this, but you were in the government that presided over the biggest tax burden since the Second World War.
Yep.
We can blame COVID for that. We can blame Ukraine. Equally, you all come into the studio and talk such a good game on immigration, and yet none of you in government have ever honoured your manifesto pledges to bring it down legally and illegally.
Yep.
What happened to David Cameron's tens of thousands? Can you make a pledge in the studio to say that you'd put a cap on legal migration?
You've asked two questions. One is the tax burden. The tax burden did rise, as it did in many other countries, because we spent 400 billion supporting businesses and families through COVID and a cost of living crisis caused by the European war. So that's what happens when you spend a lot of money, unless you're fiscally irresponsible and borrow it instead. But it was coming down.
Tories were the ones who put corporation tax up, though. Let's not forget that.
The taxes were
small and medium-sized businesses won't forget that, I'm sure.
Taxes were coming down. National insurance, including small and medium-sized businesses, were coming down. But we need to do more. But on your point about migration, yes, I do think that we need to have a cap. I think it needs to be. It needs to be probably in the tens of thousands.
Right.
I also think something else, that we need to probably have some link between the kind of pressures that migration brings in terms particularly of housing and the level of migration that we think is right.
How much housing should we be building? The Labour Party have kept David Cameron's target at 300,000.
1.5 million over the 5 years,
well,
300,000
better than the Tories. They only managed a million.
No, we did 1 million in the last Parliament and 2.5 million since 2010, and we
but 1 million in a Parliament versus 1.5 million in a Parliament.
Let's get trading statistics. Get one fact very clear. Under the last Labour government, we saw house building its lowest level since the 1920s. OK, so I'll take no lectures from Labour on building houses.
What would you set your target at?
I think that is one of those areas where the parliamentary party needs to come together and work through our proposal. Now, you're quite rightly asking these questions, but we have 5 years now to the next general election, and I think it's absolutely right that on issues like that, and the ECHR would be another example, where they are highly contentious, they need to be thought through.
Will you leave the ECHR if necessary?
Carefully. Right, we're dotting around a lot here.
No, I know, because we're going
let's
I'm
go
looking
for
at the time
on the ECHR, we need to come to a settled position across the parliamentary party. To make a stark position on the ECHR in this contest, I believe, is a misstep. Because if you win this contest partly on the basis of saying we're going to leave and that's it, you will go back to a parliamentary party, many of whom will say, I'm sorry, I'm not going with that.
Well, fewer of them might have
and that doesn't drive unity.
To be fair.
But what I would say, as a matter of principle, is I will not allow the ECHR, or anything else for that matter, stand in the way of us being able to deliver an effective deterrent to illegal crossings, because that, we know, is the element that drives solving the problem. A form of Rwanda, I think, should definitely be on the table. Look, we saw with Albania, where you had a returns policy, people coming here going straight back. The numbers dropped by 90% almost overnight.
If people are coming here from safe countries, should they be able to stay? Yes or no?
Well, if they're genuine refugees
if they're coming from
under
safe
genuine
countries,
schemes,
they can't be refugees, can they?
Well, no, of course, we shouldn't be having a situation where people are coming to France, staying in Calais and then coming across here. Absolutely not. But look, deterrence works, Camilla. We saw what happened with people from Northern Ireland beginning to go into the Republic when they saw the Rwanda scheme coming on board. We saw the pause in crossings while they waited for a Labour government because they were worried about Rwanda.
I'm steamrolling ahead because I want to get a couple more responses just on the riots. Do you think it was right for anti-racism protesters to protest outside the headquarters of Reform UK this weekend?
I think if there are peaceful demonstrations, that is fine.
But Reform
in
UK?
General.
Basically, they're conflating Nigel Farage and Reform with the far
Nigel
right.
Farage,
Is he far
and
right?
I've been very vocal on Nigel Farage and his role in these riots and his comments on it. I think he has been very wrong and misguided to have called into question, for example, early on the truthfulness of the police around what happened in that awful situation in Southport.
Is he far right?
I wouldn't describe Nigel Farage in those terms.
So
but he's a populist.
Why are anti-racism protesters conflating
that's a question
with
for
the
them.
far right?
If there's peaceful protest, it's peaceful process, and that we're a country that allows free speech and protest, and we should stand by that.
Final cue.
But populism is the thing that has to be called out here, Camilla.
Well, populism's quite popular, isn't it? If you had been more populist in the Tories, you might have won the election.
No, there's a distinction here. Having popular policies is one thing, and we should strive for those, absolutely. But being a populist means setting up a them against us, the bogeyman, the people that aren't being truthful for you, the police that aren't being fair, the government that's not on your side.
We're going into law and order in just a minute, and we're running out of time.
But Mel, what do you think about people who have
been online and maybe incited people to riot, then being put in prison? Is that a good use of prison, our crowded prison space? Or would you rather see them on the streets repairing the damage?
Camilla, we now have to accept that the online world is part of the real world in the sense that it leads to real consequences.
Okay.
And where people do that kind of thing, they should face the full force of the law.
Mel Stride, thank you. We got through a lot.
We did. I wish we had more time. If
good
only
to
we had
see
more
you
time.
on a different kind of broadcast round in the GB News studio, and good luck in the leadership race. Thank you very much. As I say, we're going to be discussing law and order, easy for me to say, next, with former Met Detective Chief Superintendent Kevin Hurley. Want to know what he makes of the police and the government's handling of the riots. Stay with us. Don't move.
Hello, welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. It's going to be a warm day today, plenty of sunshine on offer, turning even hotter on Monday with the risk of some thundery downpours too. But back to this morning, many places seeing a dry start, and that will continue through the day as well. There is going to be some cloud, especially across the southern areas of England and across southern areas of the coast as well. So mist and fog still lingering here. But on the whole, plenty of fine and dry weather, and it's going to be feeling warm as well. Temperatures across northern parts of England and Scotland, 22 degrees. Further towards the south, hotter here and humid, 29 degrees. Now into this evening across parts of Scotland, staying fine and dry, plenty of late evening sunshine, and temperatures even at 5 p.m. holding up at around 20 degrees. Across parts of western Northern Ireland, we're just seeing a bit more clouds starting to build later on in the evening, but elsewhere, many places seeing a fine end to the working week. Just a bit more of a breeze now picking up across the south coast. And that will continue as we go into Sunday evening with some strong and gusty winds across western areas, and this is helping to drive some showers that could be thundery through Monday, the early hours of Monday. Then across Northern Ireland, we'll see some heavy, thundery, showery rain, but temperatures staying up at around 17 to 20 degrees, so a humid and uncomfortable night as we go into Monday morning. But we do have a band of thundery, showery rain moving its way north and eastwards, affecting western parts of Scotland, so could give some difficult driving conditions with frequent lightning here and some gusty winds. Elsewhere, many places staying dry, sunny spells as well for most of us. The odd thunderstorm can't be ruled out, but highs up to 30, possibly even 33 degrees. Bye-bye.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm joined now by former Met Detective Chief Superintendent Kevin Hurley. Lovely to see you this morning. Can we discuss two-tier policing and whether it exists or not? What do you think?
Well, at the moment, the statements are that it doesn't exist, but certainly in my 30-odd years in police and time since, I can say that when dealing with certain ethnic minority groups, police do walk on eggshells, they do back off, and they're extremely cautious in how they deal with them. So from my point of view, at a strategic level, it exists. At the operational level, police officers, this is the guys and girls on the street, they get on with the job such as they see it in front of them, but they also do so in the mindset that if they are caught on video in a situation that can be misinterpreted or makes them look bad, especially with an ethnic minority, they know they'll be thrown under the bus. So, of course, there is not an official policy on it, but it has for many years been one of be very cautious or back off or withdraw or don't use excessive or don't use stop and search on certain ethnic minority groups and so on. I mean, the example of it is actually, and I'll cut to the chase here, is knife crime in London. Most of the people who die from stabbing in London are young black males, and most of the people who do the murders in London are young black males. So the people who do the crying are black mothers because their sons get life imprisonment or they're dead. Although there is disproportionate stop and searching of black youth in London, quite right too, because they are the ones doing the dying and the ones doing the killing. However, as a result of this continual cry that police stop black youths too much, many police officers have withdrawn from doing stop and search. It's down to about a third of what it once was 10 years ago. So yes, that's an example of it, and knife crime continues to go.
I think the black community, Kevin, I think the black community would obviously hit back at that and say, look, like all communities, we have people that commit criminality. That doesn't mean we should all be tarred with the same brush. And this idea that stop and search has been used disproportionately when it comes to some communities that are just trying to get on with their lives and minding their own business.
Yeah, that's unless you ask actual black mums who live in the inner city, because I have done that, and I've said, do you want me to direct my staff not to stop and search black youths? And there's a furore when they say no, you must do more of it. So it depends who you speak to. If you talk to various activists and so on who are out there, it's in their best interest, frankly, they get TV appearances, they're on different quangos, of course they're going to argue. I'll be called a bigot for saying this. The fact is that I ran Operation Blunt in 2008 for the Met, where we had 29 youth murders in 1 year. 4 years later, we were down to 8. And the main reason was we did stop and search on certain inner city areas where the focus was on black youth gangs. So I can put my hand on my heart and say, I led an operation that saved over 100 black youths from being killed and maybe 300 getting life in prison. I have no problems in saying that.
No. Kevin, just to bring it back to the riots, you mentioned there this idea of being filmed. It strikes me that the online community has become the enemy of the police in two ways. First of all, because of the fact that the internet can be used so easily to incite violence, to get people to link up and have riots in different towns and cities. But also this idea, and this obviously was in evidence in Manchester Airport, the police being filmed. Should there be some kind of law to prevent the police being filmed? Obviously, we see their body cam footage, but we get these sort of half-baked pictures of what's actually happened in any policing situation, because you can't see the whole film and from start to finish. You just see snapshots.
No, absolutely not. Everyone should be allowed to film. The police, it's right that the public, politicians, media hold police to account. Where we have got a problem is in the Luddite-like approach of senior police leaders to the way the modern world's moving now with Twitter X, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, use of Periscope and so on, and body-worn cameras. If you look in America, they are really wising up to this situation, that as soon as a contentious incident occurs, police will put videos of it going out on the media. Now, police leaders will say, this could affect court proceedings. Well, maybe it does. However, what is most important for the police is not that they win on an individual incident, it's that they maintain public confidence and the public think they're working for. So if a case is contentious, then they should film it with immediate coverage of what's occurred, because winning overall public appreciation or acceptance is far more important than the individual case.
Kevin Hurley, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us this morning. Well, coming up next, we're going to be hearing from the prison side of things. Steve and Val from Tempus Novo are former prison officers, and they're here to describe what it's like being in prison, but also how best to reform offenders after release. Don't go anywhere.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
We got an incredible story this week of a young teenager who has raised more than £5,000 for charity.
13-year-old, just 13 years old, Cameron Hutchison cycled the West Highland Way with his dad, Colin, in just 25 hours, raising money for international food charity Mary's Meals. And the 96-mile route took Cameron and Colin to the foot of Ben Nevis.
Wow. Now, the organisation provides daily school meals to more than 2.4 million children in countries such as Syria, Haiti and Malawi.
We are delighted to be joined now by cyclist and fundraiser Cameron Hutchison. Cameron, it's so lovely to have you here. How are you today?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, very well.
Well, we're very impressed to have you. We are honoured to have you. First of all, do you like cycling?
Yeah, it's one of my favourite sports, so yeah, I just wanted to do that.
What kind of bike did you do that enormous distance in? Did you have a special bike? Was it adapted?
Well, it was my cross-country bike that I just normally use for cross-country races. So, yeah.
Wow.
You can actually see it on the screen there with the blue handlebars. That's the bike I was using.
We can, and quite a route you went on as well. So, Cameron, you're 13 years old. When did you start cycling?
I've sort of been cycling my whole life. So I got a little red balance bike when I was maybe 3 or 2, maybe. And then I kind of just got bigger bikes as I went on.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Jubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Steve Freer and Val Vavrosh from Tempus Nova, which is an organisation that deals with the rehabilitation of offenders and getting them back into work. Join me in the studio now. Slight disclaimer, because I am an ambassador of this charity, but I got you both in, chaps, because there's been a lot of talk about prison overcrowding. We've had prisons once again in the news lines because of everything going on with the riots, and let's quickly get people into prison. Don't quite know where they're going to go because they're so overcrowded. And we've had the elevation to Prisons Minister of James Timpson, who's very much associated with your line of work, which is actually stopping recidivism by getting people to earn an honest living. So, Steve, first of all, the prison overcrowding situation, just give us a quick snapshot of what life is like in prisons at the moment, because from the outsider, they look like they're completely overrun.
Indeed. I feel so sorry for the people that are in the shoes that we were in working in prisons at the moment, because they're literally not that far off capacity.
Yeah.
And usually the numbers that you hear in the press aren't the real world. It's worse than that. So all this talk of getting people in prison quickly through the courts. Yeah. I can't see how they're going to cope.
You're scratching your head, Val, and thinking, where?
Yeah, exactly. The prisons are bursting at the seams. I mean, what we do is actually we're trying to empty the prisons because we're getting the people who are leaving prison, getting them into work and keeping them out of prison.
Clarify that, because you don't deal with violent offenders and people accused of sex crimes.
No.
But you could potentially face having to reform rioters. Is that something you could do, Val?
Yeah, I'm sure. There's no reason why not. Exactly the same as anyone else. As long as they're willing and want to do it, they've got to show the want. And what we will do is pair them up with one of our employers and support both of them for 12 months. We've now just placed our 1100th person into work. and only 3.4% have actually returned to custody out of that 1,100, so 38 have returned to custody within a 2-year period.
Yeah.
The national stats are they're up to around 30% reoffend within 12 months.
I mean, people say, Steve, you know, rehabilitation, it's soft on crime and criminals, but you two aren't softies. I know this because I know you. And you used to be the guys who were walking around the cells with the keys, maintaining law and order. How does it work best, Steve? Describe how, because we've talked about, you had once, I think, Bradford's most prolific car thief, who now works for a logistics company doing really well. What's the magic formula to stopping criminals from ending up back in prison?
Knowing what you're doing when you're working with them.
Yeah.
We've got nearly 100 years prison's experience in Tempest Nova, and you can't put a price on it.
But what do people need? I mean, they might leave prison illiterate. Do they need educational help? Do they just need an employer who doesn't look at the record and looks at the person and says, you can reform yourself with my help? Is that it? Psychological?
It is. They need hope, and then they need to be working with an organisation that know what they're doing and that actually can navigate the criminal justice system, which in itself complex.
And tell us how it works then. You've got partnerships with a load of firms, so you're particularly based in the north, although you'd like to expand it across the whole of the UK. And what do those employers say now that you've been working with them for some years about the prisoners that you give them to become their employees?
Well, remarkably, we did a snapshot of 100 people last year to see how many have been promoted, and it was 21. So they're actually more loyal and hard-working than the people that they get through the normal recruitment agencies.
Is that because they've been institutionalised or because they...
It's because they're so grateful, because society's turned their back on them because there's such a stigma about having a conviction.
Yeah.
And there's very, very, very little out there. We know James Timpson was the pioneer for this, and the work he's done is phenomenal, in my opinion. And he was the inspiration, really, part of the inspiration for Tempest Nova to be born. So even more good has been done in the
Just to explain,
UK.
Timpson, obviously, he runs the shoe and the key cutting business, and he basically said to himself, we need to help prisoners back into work, and so I will be a willing employer. I won't look at the criminal record, I will give them a chance.
Yeah. Which used to raise a bit of a titter because he had serving prisoners cutting keys.
Yes. Well, yeah, that's a very good point. A useful skill inside, maybe.
I mean, if James has got any sense, I mean, it costs us £3,000 to place an ex-offender into work and keep him in work for 12 months. It costs the government £51,500 to keep that person in prison for a year.
Yes.
So all we need is more £3,000 that we can help more people across the country.
Yeah.
We're currently, our target this year is to help to place 250 into work, which is, you know, you get into a stage, we can get to a stage where we could be placing 1,000 into work a year, and then we could look at maybe start closing a couple of prisons.
And what's your reoffending stat like then? With the people that you've helped, how many of them have unfortunately gone back to a life of crime?
38.
Out of
1,100.
That is a very good record.
And that's tracked for 2 years after we started working with them. So that's 3.4% compared to the 30% reoffending overall.
And that's checked on the prison system as well, so we know factually if anybody's gone back into prison nationally.
Yeah. When you look at the riots, and they've actually taken place near your neck of the woods, right? I mean, we saw Hare Hills, which just seemed to be people just jumping on the bandwagon of wanton criminality. You're used to dealing with criminals. What's your assessment of the riots? And have people just been opportunistic? Is there a sense to which we're lawless?
I think, sorry, Steve, how I see it, and there was a bit of a disturbance in my hometown, Barnsley. And a couple of people came on and said, look, I'm not right-wing, I'm not far-right, I'm just a normal person and I'm fed up with this immigration. The problem, it's not going away. It's been highlighted so much in the press and on TV.
I think it's decades of neglect, personally.
It is.
People not being listened to and frustrations boiling over. And you always get the odd idiot, or 400 is it at the minute, idiots, who will use that as an excuse, actually, to cause mayhem.
To cause trouble.
Yes.
Yeah.
And quite often, you'll find that if you dig deep into those individuals, they've actually had pretty damn horrendous upbringings and chaotic lives themselves.
I was going to ask you this about the prisoners you deal with. I mean, is there a misunderstanding? First of all, is life in prison easy?
No.
Not at all.
Far from it.
People talk about Xboxes and you can watch the football.
You're talking about for prisoners, aren't you?
Yeah, talking for prisoners, yeah.
I mean, that does happen, Xboxes, but that'll be in Category A estate.
Yeah.
Where, you know, they're in prison for a long time, so that you have to have a bit of appeasal because you have to have a relationship with those type of people as a prison officer because you're going to be together for the next 15, 20 years.
Yes.
So they do get more privileges. But
do most prisoners want to change?
Yes.
Yes.
They do.
But
at different times in their
because of their records, they can't. They find it impossible to go out and get a job.
Yes.
And that's why we formed
Because they've got this whole backlog. Their whole CV is just full of being in and out.
That's it. Yeah. If it weren't if it weren't for the 12-month support, because we offer 12-month support for both the person we're placing into the company and for the company.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for that 12-month support, the companies wouldn't be as interested. Because that's vital to the key.
And it also depends on where they're at in their lives as to whether they want to change. Because you find that the younger element, and Mr Timpson will bear us out on this because he don't employ anybody under 25.
Oh, interesting.
And he's a businessman.
Yeah.
They're not ready. It's cool to sell drugs and get $1,000 a week. Who's going to work in a warehouse for $1,000 a month?
Yeah.
You know, they've got flash cars, nice trainers. It's still a buzz evading the police. Usually when late 20s, early 30s, the lives change, they settle down, they have children, they think differently. Might even be the judge that says, next time you're in front of me, young man, it's double figures. It sobers them up, it makes them think differently.
Yeah.
There's a significant event in their lives that makes them think differently. So of the 88,000 people in custody prison currently, we know that they all don't want to change today. But tomorrow some more will, and the day after some more will.
But that 88,000, is that too high? I mean, we've had successive governments promising more prison places.
Yes, it is.
Do we need more? We need fewer.
We need fewer. I think we send people to prison ridiculous sentences.
easily.
I think they should, like they did in Scotland, I think they raised it to no less than a 12-month sentence. It's pointless sending somebody to prison for 3, 4, 5, 6 months because
it's more chaotic.
It's just chaotic for that person.
But what should they do instead? Because people want them to be punished.
Community sentences are proven statistically to have a better effect on the person. There's less chance that they'll reoffend.
So to conclude, chaps, are we saying prison works, but for the most serious crimes, and for others, other alternatives?
Yes, definitely.
And a final word as well before we go. Just prison guards, what are your former colleagues telling to you, very briefly, Val? Because less experience in prisons now, criminals sort of running the joint?
What you've got is they've dropped the age of recruitment to 19 years of age. So you've got prison officers now joining the service at 19 with no life experience. If I were James Timpson, I would shove that to 25 like he's done within his company.
OK, minimum age limit on being a prison governor.
Yes.
Right, we're running. I've got different timings in my ear, but I think we've got about 20 seconds left. So Val and Steve from Tempus Novo, thank you very much. We'll put your details on our website so people can check out your organisation. I'm going to be back in a few weeks' time because I'm having a little break. Chris Hope is going to be here next week. But up next, it's Michael Portillo. And before that, it's the weather. Have a good rest of summer.
You really could become the next giveaway winner with your chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash to spend on anything you like. Listen to what some of our previous winners have to say about winning big with us.
Hi, my name's Victoria. I won the Spring Great British giveaway. So the day we got the money in our bank account, everything just felt just a lot nicer. We went out for dinner, just enter. And you never expect to win, but I did.
Get your entry in now. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text CASH to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network.